Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom, good evening. Bit of a weird one tonight. I'm in a an unusual environment, but making the best of it. I hope my sound is a-okay. Good evening, welcome to it. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sihle Ngobese, Big Daddy Liberty, on a rather somber evening as we, as Zulu folk, plant our great king, King Goodwill Zwelithini Kabheki Zulu. So I thought I should just give a brief word of condolence once again to not only his family, but also the broader nation of a rather proud Zulu people. Nokweshona kwelanga does bring sorrow, but we keep our heads up and we keep our heads held high. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to it. Can you please do me a favor as you're joining the stream? Please smash that like button as you enter. Just hit that like button and please share this link, whether you're watching it on the Facebook page or if you're watching on YouTube. I really appreciate that. It helps get those numbers up. I do have a very special guest tonight. I'm not going to waffle away because we don't have that long. Remember, the Big Daddy Liberty Show is only 30 minutes long. So I'm going to bring him on in a moment. But what are we discussing? You might be wondering, well, we're discussing the notion that you, the ordinary faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African, are simply under water right now. You are being buried by a political elite in this country who just keep piling on taxes, keep piling on regulations, keep piling on misery on you so that you pay the cost whilst they enjoy the trappings in a economy like this one. It's an abuse if it is anything else. And the Institute of Race Relations is running a campaign called Stop Citizen Abuse, hashtag Stop Citizen Abuse. That's in the descriptor of this video. And I'm going to have Dr. Frans Cronje from the Institute of Race Relations join us now tonight to tell us, firstly, more about the campaign, what it really means, and what action points, if you will, they propose for a citizenry in this country that simply is fed up with the abuse. So without me waffling on and on, just a reminder, please smash that like button. I'm seeing the likes, guys. It's not where it should be. Please hit that like button and share this link as I bring my guest on to screen. That is Dr. Frans Cronje from the Institute of Race Relations. Frans, good evening.
Sihle, how are you? You beat me to it. But I wanted to say that I was sorry to hear about your king.
Yeah.
I think that he had a very interesting political understanding and social understanding of South Africa that a few influential leaders of the country have had over the past 20 to 30 years. And the combination of his influence together with that of Prince Buthelezi is something that has never attracted the requisite attention or understanding of how important it has been in our country. So I wanted to say that to you, and you beat me to it this evening.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for those words. And funny enough, part of tonight's conversation, we'll talk to some of the issues that the king himself would raise about what he saw as the ever-increasing encroachment of Pretoria, that is the central government, to various citizens around the country. Yes, leave aside the other issues around, the Ngonyama Trust and blah, 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 but there was a recognition by the king that, what you don't want is a centralized administration, one which, sort of puts the boot on the neck of the citizen, if you will. But that's the topic tonight, isn't it, Frans?
Yeah.
The hashtag Stop Citizen Abuse campaign. What's this all about? Who are these citizens being abused?
Yeah, you over in the early weeks of this year, as we sort of thought about the year ahead, we start to identify the issues that we're going to prioritize. And the list becomes so overwhelming. You consider the tax position, talk about that this evening, people who've lost their jobs, abuses at the hands of authorities, this chap who was shot dead in Braamfontein earlier in the week by the police that we can talk about a bit more this evening. And the list was just so overwhelming that in the campaigns team, where we run campaigns to create pressure on politicians to abandon bad ideas and embrace better ones, we realized that this is an institutional problem, and we needed to find an institutional concept with which to reflect it. And where we got to in our thinking was that we just don't get the sense that South Africans, they understand a lot and they experience a lot, but you get this feeling that there's almost a sense of Stockholm syndrome within the country. The sense that people have been so beaten, impoverished at the hands of a not very effective government, that they sometimes themselves, I mean, you gripe, you complain, you identify problems, but you don't understand the depths of it. So citizen abuse needs to do a couple of things, the campaign. One, it wants to educate people about the extent to which you have been abused by a corrupt, incompetent, and very often malicious state in South Africa, and what that has cost you, what that's cost your future, what that cost your kids, your family, and your community. That's number one. Number two is this is something that all South Africans have in common. They just experience it at different levels. Relatively middle class households, we judge, if we look at the performance of pension funds, the stock market, and read that against the devaluation of the currency, have lost in South Africa over the past decade an equivalent amount of wealth as what would happen if they were subject to a 50% wealth tax. And that's completely devastating in the middle classes. Likewise, if you're in the poorest community in South Africa, the sort of desperate working poor, we can now demonstrate that today there are less people working in South Africa, including in the informal sector, than was the case more than a decade ago. So not only is there no net job growth, there's net job losses, etc. The abuses that poor communities, when they protest, face at the hands of the police comes from a similar place to the intimidation that a lot of relatively more prosperous suburbanites feel when they see a police van pull up behind them at night, and the fear of the abuse. The pensioners who were shot with a water cannon while queuing for their grant are subject to the same indifference that any strata of our community experiences in trying to deal with the state. So we wanted to point out that you are the victim of the state. It's not a victimless crime, an incompetent government. Secondly, don't allow what's going to happen next. This will be the political strategy from the part of the government to divide communities on this question by saying, actually, your problem is not the state. Your problem is those people. You know, it's the rich. They are the reason you are poor, and you're unemployed because employers are greedy and arrogant and won't provide you with jobs or share resources, or the young emerging black middle class just doesn't get ahead because racist whites don't give you the opportunities that they would give to other whites. So realize that you all experience this to a lesser or greater extent. You have this in common. Don't allow yourself to be turned. Third, so number one, this is you're a victim of the state. It's not the state's not an external factor that has limited impact on your life. It is making your circumstances, your future, a hell of a lot worse than it would otherwise be. Secondly, you're not alone in this. Don't allow communities don't allow divide and rule. Thirdly, you're not a victim in the sense that, well, this is what you've got to put up with for the rest of your life. Because there are wonderful examples of communities across the length and breadth of this country who are starting to take the first steps all on their own to take back the responsibilities that were once those of the state and begin across every line of race and class and color and culture and politics that you can imagine, build their communities in the face of state opposition. And through the education components of this campaign, and through pointing out that this is something we all have in common, we want to create the understanding, the circumstances, the common consciousness, call it that
Yeah.
that will see more communities be inspired by their peers who've taken the first steps towards doing things for themselves, so that in the face of an obstinate government, we can begin to rebuild the country. It goes further than that, though, one step beyond this. And if you've got time this evening, we'll talk about that too. We have many facets, of course, to the work of the IRR, and some of that's risk advisory and consulting and polling. And we now see that the ANC in South Africa is very weak. And amongst young people, its support for the party has now fallen to below 50%. And what that means is that our country might be primed, standing on the brink of a political realignment on a scale of what last happened here in the 1980s and the 1990s. So that idea of building strong and resilient communities that do things for themselves is also done with the view to the potential that we may undergo a vast political realignment at some point in this decade, and having strong and robust communities that can work together through that and build a great country thereafter. It's actually, if you see it that way, for all the pain and the suffering and the distress that South Africa experiences now, on the flip side of that, my sense is that we are perhaps also nearer the inflection point or the great realignment. And that is a very, very positive thing, and something that we need to exploit. Sihle.
And I must bring the notion of ideas into that conversation, because often we're told, right? So there'll be the eternal optimists, unfortunately, who at times can be a little off base, optimist for the sake of being optimistic, but no one wants to have that conversation about the sort of ideas that need to be injected into that society in order to marshal that inflection point in the right direction. Speak to me about how this campaign begins the work of doing that.
It's called Battle of Ideas theory, as you well know, because you've schooled in it yourself. It's the most powerful thing in the world. Why do the Chinese censor the internet? Why did Nazis burn books? Why does the left in the global political debate try and deplatform critical voices? The reason is that across all these groups, one thing is held in common: an understanding of how dangerous it is when, in the face of adversity, you point out to a person that things could be different. There is a better way to do things. You do not simply have to put up with this. Stephen Biko, who was perhaps the greatest practitioner of ideas theory in South Africa and building up a black consciousness side of that idea, which is why it destroyed the black consciousness movement in the decade before South Africa's democracy. So it wouldn't be a rival. We're often asked, what do you guys do? And we do a great many things, but the most powerful thing we do is to teach communities about the ideas that they could embrace, which, if they do so and pass those ideas through, those ideas permeate their communities. The political implications of that in the fullness of time are utterly spectacular. So that's why so much of this is about education, making people understand why your circumstances are what they are, and that they could be very different if things were done differently, and that you can don't go and start to do those things already, immediately. And it's the most empowering thing, that, because otherwise you sit back, you feel if you've ever had that sense on South Africa, that you're alone, that no one speaks for you, you can sense things are going very badly wrong. You can sense that communities around you experience the same thing. But all you hear from the mainstream media and politicians is talk of division and racism, and the sort of media debate on these things, Sihle, is to try and identify which group of citizens are responsible for the problem. They're not responsible for it. They are all, to a lesser or greater extent, victims of a now failing and cruel and callous state. And that common understanding, it's never been done in South Africa. 400 years of various types of rule, if you call that the sort of modern history of South Africa, every time an administration here comes under pressure, as the ANC is today, it turns to divide and rule in order to hang
That's
on
right.
longer. The great
Absolutely.
unmet challenge of South African politics, the breakthrough from the difficult history we've had of late and the traumatic history we've had for so long, the great unmet challenge is at the point of crisis to get South Africans to understand that your neighbor, the chap next to you, the guy you see walking in the street, he's in very much the same position as you are. And if you work together, you can build a very much better society.
Absolutely. If you are just joining us, this is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Welcome to it. We're at the halfway mark of the show. My guest, Dr. Frans Cronje from the Institute of Race Relations, the head honcho over there, talking to us about a very necessary campaign. That's the hashtag Stop Citizen Abuse campaign. Please check that out in the descriptor. Make sure you sign up for that. And I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, well, we hear this conversation, and Frans, there are some questions here which are beginning to stream in. We're worried, Frans, is the sentiment people are hearing here. We're really worried. These bad ideas from the political elites right now are having a massive toll on us. Maybe just because we don't have much time, speak to us about one of the points I made in the blurb of this video, which is bad ideas such as EWC would be a further burden on us, a 100% tax on us, as the IRR put it. What do you mean by that, and why is it important for us to push back against these bad ideas?
Okay, EWC, firstly, it's the ultimate tax increase because it threatens to tax your assets, your business, your wealth, your income, your sources thereof at 100%. I mean, it's the ultimate tax. So when commentators say, well, the government has not moved much on tax, it's absolute nonsense. Right now, through Parliament, is moving the greatest tax of all. Number one. Secondly, property rights underpin substantive human liberty in every free society.
Absolutely.
And the reason for that is that if the state cannot take your stuff, it can't intimidate you and do anything else to you. It's only by dispossessing you of what you need to maintain your standard of living or make a living that it can truly oppress you. And you and I have had many conversations about that. You've had that with your listeners. You've grown up in a community that understands that incredibly well in rural Natal. So you know how damaging that is and how intimidating that is. So for us, if we move down the road of EWC, the greater risk is not just the economic one, which we'll get to now. The greater risk is that the very framework of civil rights we built up in this country 30 years ago would then be fatally eroded. On the economics of it, it's devastating for investment. In serious places, I spend a lot of my life advising various groups and institutions, and in serious places, the people who invest real money, the understanding is very good that if the South African government goes ahead with EWC, it makes the country uninvestable. And we follow a number for South Africa called the level of gross fixed capital formation to GDP, which measures levels of fixed investment into the country. And that figure has been in complete freefall since the expropriation idea was formally tabled at the end of 2007 and 2008. Sure. That will remain the case. Lastly, for you, Sihle, when I say this at various groups and places and the like, the thing that gets thrown back at me is, well, what about land reform? And EWC and land reform have absolutely nothing to do with each other.
Exactly.
These are.
Exactly.
Land reform is very important. And people who lost assets or homes or property in South Africa as a result of past racist laws deserve very urgently to be adequately compensated in whatever form they see fit. If we, however, want to create a class of successful black commercial farmers in this country, then those individuals must be afforded the same advantages that were given to white farmers here over much of the past 100 years. And those advantages were the following. Number one, access to cheap capital. It's essential to do that. Number two is excellent external support and extension services. And number three is title, the chance to own a piece of property and say, this is mine. And a spectacular fact is that through all the talk of land reform and the urgency of it and how much the government cares and how important expropriation is, there is not one law or policy that is currently being driven through on land reform that ends with a black man sitting on his stoop of his farm that he owns with a title deed in his hand where he can say, this is mine. It reveals a lie of the whole thing. To do land reform properly is easy in South Africa. One proposal we put to policymakers, and they disregard it, is, for example, this, that if you're a 100% white commercial farming operation, you should be able to borrow money at the commercial interest rate. If you are let's say, a 50-50 black-white partnership, there should be a facility through the land bank, which is already a state bank, that you can borrow at half the commercial rate. Sihle, if that happened, the great majority of serious white farmers in this country would be running around looking for partners that they could bring into the businesses. And if you're a 100% black commercial farmer wanting to start off, given the disadvantages you've had through history, which is real, you should be able to borrow at 0%. That is what a caring government would do to address the question of land reform in this country. I've polled enough on South Africa, read enough polls over a number of years to know that a proposal like that would meet with significant support from a great majority of black, white, whatever people they are. That's how you do it. So EWC as the only way to pull this off is complete nonsense. It's an attempt by the South African government to open the way to the erosion of civil rights and to seize assets across the economy to plug expenditure gaps in order to continue to facilitate corrupt patronage networks. It's all that it is. It's a fraud perpetrated upon the people, and it's worse, Sihle, for the fact that it's a fraud that seeks to exploit the historical pain and dispossession of black South Africans in order to fool the society out of the civil rights and economic freedoms that had begun to earn and develop when we became a democracy 25 years ago.
Sure. We are running out of time, which is annoying me greatly right now. But in the last 8 minutes that we have, I want to pivot this conversation because people are, and I'm seeing it in the comments, there is a almost growing sense of optimism. We've never heard the issues put to us in this way. Seems to be the common theme coming out. People are now wondering, how do we get involved? How do we push back? How do we fight back? How do we inform ourselves of these good ideas that actually speak to the language of reform that is needed? And how do we get involved in this campaign?
Yeah, it's on you. All of it's on you. No one's coming to help you. Yeah. Pretoria's not coming to help you. I'm not coming to help you. And the IRR who I work for, which I work for, that's not going to come and save your community either. But we can do this for you. We can firstly help to create the education within your community for people to begin to understand, firstly, clearly what the problem is, number one. Secondly, which is so important if South Africa is going to be a success, to understand that across lines of class and history and economics and politics and race and gender and everything else, there is a lot of common ground in this country. That is crucial, that you learn how easy it could be to begin to work across those lines within your community. And thirdly, to highlight and expose communities to examples, of which there are already many, where communities have started to take the first steps towards rebuilding. Some are very modest, Sihle. Some are taking a few steps towards community patrols and filling potholes. There are other examples. We're going to highlight a lot of these where communities have completely taken over municipal service delivery from corrupt and incompetent administrations, and they're building those communities for themselves. In the course of all of this, we have this role of facilitating information, of education, of cross-pollination. All of that happens. But we do something else that very often you won't see, is we create vast pressure on political elites to begin to understand the futility of trying to get in the way of communities that are standing up to do things for themselves, and to point out to those elites the long-term political consequences of getting in the way of a force as powerful and as important as this. We have very pressure breeds reform. Going to talk nicely to the minister and say, please, sir, please don't take the people's property away from them. It doesn't work. But being able to go and see a politician and say, listen here, the way you guys are going, quite frankly, they're going to hang you from the lampposts outside Latuli House if you carry on with an unemployment rate this high. And to demonstrate that, because we have very well-developed analytical research and policy expertise within the group, to demonstrate that behind the scenes to politicians in a calm and cool manner is a very powerful thing to do as well. And then to say, when you see that community going out to do its own thing, you better get behind that and not get in the way, because the consequences for you yourself will be absolutely fatal. All politics is about forcing a balance of power, not about being nice. You do try and be polite, of course, and so on, but being nice or appeasing never works. You force a balance of power. And being able to take examples of these communities, the polling we use, the economic data we read those polls against. It's the case now, Sihle, that half of young people in South Africa do not have a job. It's staggering. Less than 1 in 10 young people is passing maths in matric with a grade of 50% or higher, for example. And we're quite good at taking that information, tying it to political trend lines, and explaining how the consequent diminishing support for the South African government is a function of its very own policies. So you try and do two things at once. You try and build pressure on the ruling administration to reform, and at the same time, you try and help communities to stand up for themselves. If you do both those things at the same time, then the prospects for the country on a sort of medium to longer term view actually become really, really positive. And we've been here before in South Africa. This isn't the first time we've been in trouble. The country's faced far greater odds. It's been in far deeper economic holes. It's been governed by people who, frankly, were a lot worse than the already very disappointing people who govern the country today. And it's dug itself out of those positions before. And the common thing there, each and every time, the most powerful countervailing force in favor of South Africa's long-term success is its people on the ground when they learn to work together with each other. It is not a society that is torn in half amongst people, by ideological and racial schisms. That's another nonsense idea perpetrated on the country by the mainstream media and by social media. We know this because we've polled this stuff. We've done it for decades. We understand it really well. There's such a font of common decency and goodwill across every strata of class and race and whatever you think of. You get us on one evening or day when you want. I'll show your guests some of the numbers. You'll be amazed, but you won't be at the end, because I know what happens in those briefings. I tell people, actually, relations between South Africans are much better than the government tells you they are. And at first they say, well, they don't really believe it. And then you show them the numbers. And through the course of a couple of minutes, the comment that gets back to you is, you know what, that actually makes sense. Because my experience of South Africa is that the people that I meet in my daily affairs, rich, poor, doesn't matter what they are actually really nice to me. And so where is this great depth of hatred that's tearing the country apart? It's bullshit, Sihle. It is a myth perpetrated by the government in the hope that people will buy that for long enough to be distracted from the fact that the real and the deeper problem rest in the middle of the administration that runs the place and claims to do so in the best interests of the great majority of South Africa's people.
Absolutely. Frans, we have run out of time, unfortunately. This is just one of those terrible things about this show. I would extend this, but I have to be at the studios in a few minutes just now. Maybe the final word, and I really mean this in 2 minutes, Frans.
It will be less.
The galvanized person now who's listening to this, how do they get involved in this campaign?
Well, the fact you're listening to it, you've taken the first step. Go look at all Siegler's online social media stuff and websites. Go to our stuff, ir.org.za, or better yet, go to the Daily Friend. It's a new South African newspaper. It's about a year old. It was created by some of my colleagues. It's absolutely amazing. That will teach you a lot of the ideas. Then, if you like what you're reading and hearing and seeing on its various groups, the podcasts and the like, share that inside your community. If you find that people around you start to say, this stuff's hell of a cool, actually, because it's so different to the usual tales of woe and hate and demise and collapse that we're confronted with, and a couple of you think there's something you can do with it, absolutely get in touch with us. We'll start to show you examples of where communities are beginning to rebuild, and by that stage, you'll realize you've taken a great number of steps towards making your own community resilient and starting the long, hard slog of building a great future for all South Africans. Siegler, awesome always to talk to you. Thank you for your time this evening. We must do it more often.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Sadly, I think we lost our Facebook audience somewhere along the way, but I will upload this video, guys, so that you don't miss what Frans Cronje from the Institute of Race Relations had to say. Frans, thank you very much. Much appreciated. As I get Frans off the screen, just a reminder to you, dear viewer, that firstly, just thank you for watching. Let me actually begin it right there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are going to continue this conversation with Dr. Frans Cronje. I'm hoping to have him on again very, very soon, preferably in a panel with some of his colleagues. So you'll get to see exactly what we're talking about here, and we'll even allow for and cater for some of the data that he speaks to. This isn't us just being optimistic for the sake of being optimistic. There are real hard numbers behind what we are talking about. And a major thanks to him on that. Thank you for watching, dear viewer. And with that being said, catch me in a few moments on KykNet with Valdemir Pelser. We also daar gesels rond 'n paar issues that verklaar die land. So I'll see you on that one in a moment. And thank you for watching. I'll see you on Sunday for Liberty and Friends. Remember, Liberty and Friends every Sunday at 8 p.m. I look forward to seeing you over there. A reminder to every single one of you who's just joining, thank you for commenting. If you like the content that you see here, please support the show. The information is all in the descriptor of this video. So with that being said, good night. Thank you very much. And remember, never trust a commie.